So tonight, we are delighted to welcome Avital Leibovich. Avital is the director of our AJC Jerusalem office and coordinates the work that AJC does from that office. Prior to joining AJC, Avital had a distinguished career that included 22 years in senior media and public relations positions within the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces. She served as the face of the IDF and participated in thousands of interviews with international media, including such critical periods as during the Gaza operations in 2008 and 2012, and the return of Gilad Shalit from Gaza in 2011. She also established a branch of the IDF to address the rapidly growing influence of social media networks and internet platforms.
I am so thrilled to be here interviewing my colleague and friend, Lieutenant Colonel Avital Leibovich. When we found out that she was coming and was going to be here for a few days, we said we were going to take advantage of her visit.
And prevent me from sleeping for 3 days.
So Marty mentioned that we had a great session this morning with legislators and with county executive and others, but she actually had 11 separate events that's scheduled for her time here, 48 hours, and we're so thrilled. So thank you all for coming. I would say that when we started to plan this, people said to me, what's the topic going to be for Avital's talk at this major community event? And we started to plan this in July. And my answer, of course, was, I have no idea. This is based on current events, and current events seem to change day to day. So what I might have talked about in July, of course, has little relevance to today. So let's get right to current events. My assumption, for example, in terms of what I might have thought in July with the elections, was that, of course, a governing coalition would have been formed by the beginning of November, and you would be analyzing that governing coalition, but that's not the case. So tell us, where are we with the election results?
We are right now facing an unfortunate situation of a stalemate, really, in Israel. We have, as you know, a transition government that has been around for almost a year, which means that there are a lot of limited options of receiving decisions and law legislation, really. Politically, if you look at the trends in the past decade in Israel, this will be helpful to understand what's going on right now. So here are the trends. Number one, most of the Israeli voters are center and center-right. The left, the labor, the left of the left, they're actually shrinking. And you can see the numbers. The Labour Party has 5 seats. Left of the Labour Party, Meretz, has 4 seats and barely managed to cross the threshold. Most of the Israeli voters are going center and center-right. This is number one trend. Number two, the Arab Israelis actually have maintained their positioning as the third largest party in the Israeli parliament, out of 14 parties, by the way. The third largest. They had some crisis with their voters who felt they're not representing them. They're talking about the Palestinians and not Arab Israelis. They managed in the last campaign to bridge that gap and again resumed some of the trust of the voters. So they're keeping this number 3 place in the long list of parties. And the third trend I think we should know is that in the past decade, any party, any new party that was built in purpose of trying to replace the governing party failed. Tzipi Livni's party did not survive. Yair Lapid's party won for a very short time. And now we're seeing for the third time another new party that was built again to replace the ruling party, the Likud, blue and white party. And so far, it has not made progress. The president of Israel, as you know, gave Netanyahu the mandate to try and build a coalition. According to the law in Israel, each candidate gets 28 days and can also ask for 14 days of extension Netanyahu returned the mandate to the president after 26 days. The president chose Benny Gantz, the leader of the second large majority party, to try and build the government. I think something like 14, 15, 16 days have passed since he received that mandate. There are ongoing negotiations with different heads of parties. You may see from time to time pictures, photo ops of the two leaders of the party smiling with a caption underneath, a dramatic caption about the negotiations. I don't think that at this point of time, I don't see any possible way to build a coalition. Very unfortunate. If that would be the case, then Israel is going again to elections in March. Obviously, we don't need that. Israeli economy does not need that. This is something that costs 2 billion shekels to the Israeli economy. It's really a lot of money. But even more so, a situation of a transition government really holds a freeze on every different topic, every various topics in the area, in the country. We can't really promote anything. Foreign affairs issues, educational issues, municipal issues, everything is really stuck. And this is even a greater problem than the issue of the cost of the budget. So right now we are there. There may be, by the way, one scenario which may happen. The scenario is that one of the ultra-Orthodox parties will decide to cross the line from the Likud party, from Netanyahu's right-wing bloc, to the Blue and White Party, in return for generous funding promises, in return to some ministerial jobs. But if that does happen, we are looking, if you add up the numbers, we're still looking at very narrow government, something like 61 seats. And a narrow government in Israel, we all know what that means. It means that the lifeline of this government will be very short. So this is the current situation, unfortunate.
And of course, it's not so unusual for ultra-Orthodox parties to go either to the left or the right. That had been their traditional way of behaving, that they would go to the highest bidder, essentially. And in recent years, they've been seen as a party of the right, but that wasn't always the case.
Yeah, there were 2 times, I would say, that the ultra-Orthodox parties were not a part of the coalition. I wouldn't say these were very successful governments. However, it is an option, it is a possibility. Look, the ultra-Orthodox parties, one is representing, as you know, the Sephardic communities, the other ones are representing the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox communities. At the end of the day, they are asking for funding for their own education system, welfare benefits for their population. An average family, an ultra-Orthodox family, has 6 to 8 kids, so they need those benefits in order to really financially survive. And they don't interfere usually on foreign affairs issues. In other words, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, Israel international relations, they don't care about that as long as they receive, this, I would say, package of promises, which includes specific ministerial portfolios and the fundings to their facilities.
So this begs the question, of course, if we go to a third election, if Israel goes to a third election, will there be a difference? You've now had 2 elections. It's been impossible to form a coalition. What confidence do we have that it's going to make a difference with the third election?
Look, you want me to talk about confidence with politics? I don't think that would be wise.
Tell us a scenario that works.
Look, if Blue and White will win, I do think that we will not see a substantial difference from the current government. Of course, different people. But in terms of policies, on the security issue, for instance, I think we'll see more of the same conservative kind of policy. Maybe we will see some issues making progress on the issues of religious state, for example. Of course, this depends if the ultra-Orthodox parties will be a part of the coalition or not. If they will be a part of the coalition, this will be a lot more difficult to achieve. One of the issues that is debated currently in Israel is the draft of the ultra-Orthodox to the military. An average Israeli asked himself, why do I have to send my kids to risk their lives on the border with Lebanon or the border with Gaza, where the ultra-Orthodox don't contribute to the society? And this is something that divides the country. And unfortunately, I would like to see, as an Israeli, I would like to see the heads of the parties, of the ultra-Orthodox parties, work in a direction of unification rather than division. And I think we can find a golden way to solve that.
But what I'm asking is, what's going to happen between November and March such that the outcome may be different?
Again, the same thing will happen as happened before November. It's not such, we don't have huge choices here. Basically, we're seeing different kinds of negotiations. The negotiations could lead maybe into new partnerships. Blue and White Party is not a real party. It's an artificial collection of three factions, which have from time to time differences of opinions on different issues. So I'm not sure we'll see them unified in March. I don't know. But there could be formation of new partnerships. By the way, if you just mentioned the Arab parties. The Arab parties had always a policy in which they refused to be a part of the government. And this is a huge mistake, because this way they could directly influence their voters and the Arab population. And standing behind this principle that they will not be a part of a Jewish government, it's ridiculous. We're in 2019. So maybe here we will see a change. I hope for that.
Although the other parties have also made it clear that they weren't going to accept the Arab parties.
You know what they say vocally is one thing, and then on the ground, behind the scenes, other things take place. It's not really what you see is what you get.
What about Netanyahu? What if he's indicted?
So according to the law...
Which could happen in this interim period.
According to the Israeli law, a person who has not been convicted can sit on a public chair until that happens. Now, according to the lawyers, the length of this process is estimated to take between 3 and 5 years. So this means that, let's say there is a rotation, there is a unity government, Netanyahu can sit as prime minister for the 2 first years and then be a minister, and he will rotate with, let's say, Benny Gantz. According to the law, it's not a problem.
Is there any chance, perhaps, that the Likud party would look for another leader if he's been indicted to put forward in March?
First of all, I would say there are a few runner-ups already from the Likud who declared their wish to run, but they all said only after Netanyahu will end his public service. In other words, those hopes for some kind of internal party revolution, let's keep them for different kinds of movies and, action movies, but I don't really think that there will be a rebellion situation from within the party and some ministers or Knesset members will overthrow Netanyahu to take his place. I don't see that happening.
Okay, I'm changing the subject. At the J Street conference last weekend, several Democratic presidential candidates mentioned that they would perhaps withhold aid if Israel was not complying with some policy, let's say. Tell us a little bit about that aid. Where does U.S. aid go to in terms of the Israeli budget?
Well, as the best of my knowledge, the U.S. aid goes primarily to the West Bank, but also to Gaza, usually supporting different kinds of efforts on the ground, whether it's humanitarian efforts that have to do with specific gear or food or education. That's where the U.S. aid goes. Look, if you look at the Palestinian Authority's budget, you will see in the last couple of years, you will see a major decrease from donations from external sources. A major decrease. At the height, I think it was around 1/3 of the budget came from outside sources, which is unbelievable. And today, I think it's around 16%, something like that. And it's still decreasing even more. So the dependency of the Palestinian Authority today is not what it used to be in the past, because after all, this is a society that produces exports through Jordan to the rest of the Arab world or other countries in the world. So there is quite a stable economy there. By the way, Israel is also a trade partner of the Palestinian Authority. And of course, needless to say, 150,000 Palestinians come to work in Israel every day. So the economic relations are quite strong. I don't see a situation really that the US aid will completely cease to exist. And if so, this means that there will have to be an alternative, some kind of an alternative. By the way, cutting the funds for UNRWA altogether was a huge mistake because there was no substitute. Now, I'm not a fan of UNRWA, I have to say that. And I think that many of the things that they do and the way they employ
so this is
Hamas
the UN
members,
organization that
the
supplies
UN Relief Organization,
yes,
Relief
funds
and
to
Welfare.
Palestinians or those who are considered refugees from 1948.
Look, out of 12,000 workers, it became some sort of an agency, a work agency, which eventually created working places for Palestinians, which is fine, as long as they were not Hamas members. But it doesn't seem reasonable to me that a UN agency employs Hamas activists. The contents in those UNRWA schools was very problematic, was very far from promoting peace and love between Israel and the Palestinians. However, I do think that there was a need to substitute UNRWA with another option and not cut it completely, because at the end of the day, do we want to create a humanitarian crisis? We don't want to go there.
So funds are going to the West Bank, to the Palestinians, but funds are also used for military purposes.
But I want to talk about the funds that are going to the families of the terrorists, because this is unbelievable. 8% of the budget of the Palestinian Authority till today goes to sponsor families who support terrorism, who their loved ones became martyrs, according to them, and attacked Israeli targets. It's unbelievable. And I'm asking myself, what kind of message is the Palestinian Authority sending to the young generation? Because let's see, we had from 2015 to 2017, we had a horrible, horrible, violent wave in which Palestinians came and stabbed Israelis, Jews. By the way, they looked for Jews. And you know how they recognized the Jews? According to them, it was either religious people who carried a kippah, wore kippah, or people from the businesses, from the security establishment. Policemen, soldiers, and so on. They didn't know that we have Muslims serving in the police and Christians and so on, but this is how they identified. So we had over 440 Israelis were wounded, and around 50 were murdered due to stabbings and due to rammings with cars. And what would Abu Mazen do after something like that? Let's say there was a successful ramming attack. One was in Armon HaNatziv in Jerusalem. This is a promenade, beautiful promenade in Jerusalem. A group of young soldiers went to some kind of an historic lesson in the promenade. A young Palestinian driver, I think 29 years old, took a truck, ran over the people, killed them, of course, killed a few of them. And then Abu Mazen goes to the widow and has a photo up. And of course, this appears in the official website of the Palestinian Authority and in the local papers. And this is the example that is being set to the young generation. It's horrible. Or naming a city square on a suicide bomber who killed in Jerusalem in a supermarket, a 17-year-old killed in Jerusalem in the supermarket, 20 people. This is outrageous. Abu Mazen can't stand on the UN's General Assembly podium, talk about values, where he himself does not give that example.
And of course, we have the Taylor Force Act in this country,
the Taylor
which
Force Act was critically important. I think it was a great initiative, an important one. And you know what? It was also a lesson to other countries in the world.
So this was, the Taylor Force Act made it impossible for U.S. funds to go for Palestinian families of what they would call martyrs, terrorists who killed
And it's
Israelis.
the beginning. I would expect other countries to do the same, to legislate the exact same act in order for them to make sure that they're funding. Imagine, it's tax money. It's the people of those countries' money. And they have no idea. They think they're contributing to this amazing, dialogue, system of dialogue and maybe classes that bring Israelis. It has nothing to do with that. And I hope that there will be other countries who will adapt the model of the Taylor Force Act and act accordingly.
let's move to Iran.
Favorite topic.
Yes. So over the past few weeks, Israel has been on heightened alert. Fear of an attack, perhaps via Yemen, of cruise missiles or attack drones, which would be coming from Iran. Tell us about why Israel's on heightened alert at the moment.
So let's talk a little bit about the presence of Iran in the region. Actually, it's very clear. Iran is looking in a way to surround Israel, to encompass Israel from all angles. And let's check this out. Lebanon. Lebanon obviously has Hezbollah. Hezbollah was founded by Iran, funded by Iran. Unfortunately, today, not enough countries recognize the entirety of Hezbollah as a terror organization, which means that politicians from Hezbollah can actually participate in different conferences all over the world. This is ridiculous. But the problem is that Hezbollah turned Lebanon into some kind of a military hub in many, many civilian villages. On the border with Israel, there are 160 Lebanese villages. Hezbollah actually created an underground facility in which it stores its launchers and rockets and other kinds of ammunitions, and basically making sure that in the next war, should it come, we hope it wouldn't, but should it come, the civilians will be the human shields, because there is no other option. Because if you live in a house and underneath your house a tunnel is being dug and rockets are being stored, what can you do? You have no choice. So Hezbollah is, of course, preparing for the next day. 2006, we had the war in Lebanon with Hezbollah. Hezbollah finished the war with 20,000 rockets. Today, according to the estimation of the Israeli intelligence, they have something like 150,000 rockets. Imagine to yourselves and try to think which other military in the world, not a terror group, a military, which other military in the world even has this number of rockets? And obviously the rockets are pointed at Israel, not anywhere else. In the last couple of weeks, there have been riots in Lebanon. They started over some economic issues, new taxes and so on. But this is a show of lack of trust between the Lebanese people and the current government. These protests created a situation in which hospitals were closed, banks were closed. The entire country was really on the brink of chaos. And in a situation of chaos, these are the great hours of the terror groups. They flourish when there is chaos in the Middle East. So that's Lebanon. Syria, as you all know, Iran has been trying desperately to build infrastructure in Syria so that this infrastructure would serve as launching pads against Israel. Israel decided to draw a very clear red line. It will not allow Iran to build an Iranistan in Syria. This would not happen. Israel would not risk the situation in which two fronts are being opened. Israel is being attacked from two fronts, Lebanon and Syria. So this is number two. Number three, Gaza. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are two terror groups currently located in Gaza. Hamas is controlling Gaza, but they're also funded by Iran. And they're also partnering with different extreme organizations, for example, in the Sinai. So in a way, without even mentioning the nuclear aspirations in Iran, Israel is surrounded with Iranian presence at 3 out of its 4 borders. And this is quite an extreme situation. Now, should Iran one day achieve nuclear capacity, then we are talking about an existential threat already. There is no question about it. We have to also say maybe one word about the US policy in the region, which is currently a policy of, I would say, not really being present in the region or in a very limited way. And this is not something that started last week. I remember when President Obama said that there is a red line, and if Syrian civilians will be killed by chemical weapons, this is a red line that America will not allow. And it allowed for 5 more years. And every week, 250 civilians were killed. Sometimes there were weeks which more people were killed. And then with the Saudi oil tanker, which there was no response. And then the Kurds. And then the presence in Syria. Now, at the end of the day, all these activities send some kind of a message which is read loud and clear by Iran, by Turkey, by Russia. And the message really says, you can do whatever you want, solve your own things. We're not interested. We're right now not interested. And this puts Israel in a situation in which it has, at the end of the day, to defend itself.
Okay, but these factors existed before. Why is Israel on heightened alert now? It's only been over the past few weeks. What is the concern in Israel about Iran?
I think that the chaos that we have in our region is by far more sensitive than a year ago or 2 years ago. So I mentioned Syria, I mentioned Lebanon. The situation in Jordan is not great too. There are 1.5 million Syrian refugees, which are a burden on Jordan's economy, on Jordan's education system, which has moved to teach in 2 and 3 shifts. A lot of elements which I would not say they're innocent elements there. Again, creating tensions. There were some terror attacks inside Jordan. And now if you look at Iraq, the bordering country with Jordan, then you see there height tensions too. And you see again Iran trying to create a presence in Iraq. For instance, one of the things Iran did is put different kinds of governors, Shiite governors in Iraq, basically trying to create some nature of Shiitism in the country. Since October 25th, Iraqi civilians are marching in the streets again, trying to protest for this kind of situation, which they do not want. So I think that today we are looking at a very explosive region, chaotic region, and again, in such a chaotic region, this is exactly where the terror groups flourish, because there aren't enough actors in the area. There isn't enough inspection in the area, and this is really fertile ground to try and attack. By the way, a few days ago, 2 things happened. 1, 10 rockets were fired from Gaza. It was Friday evening. Imagine yourself in the following scenario. Friday evening, you finish Shabbat dinner, you're at home with your family. 9 o'clock in the evening, sirens go off. It's 7 different Israeli communities. And you're going to shelter. You're staying in shelter 10 minutes, 15 minutes until it's fine to leave. Then the following day, you have to wake up in the morning and behave that everything is normal and go to work and send your kids to school like it's a normal society, normal situation. By the way, the foreign media had stopped reporting about this long ago. Did any of you read in the international media, did you see on CNN, for example, the news, anything about the rockets? No, because it started in 2001, and 40,000 rockets later, it's not a news story. So nobody reports it anymore, except maybe Jewish media, maybe the wires, the news agencies, because, that's a business issue, that's something else. So that happened on Friday night, and the day before that, Hezbollah tried to fire a rocket towards a drone, an Israeli drone, that was collecting surveillance in Lebanon. So the bubbling is constantly underground. The chaos is only supporting this potential of explosion. And I'm very concerned.
So why does this happen? For many months, there were the protests at the border, and Gaza was a critical issue for Israel. Then suddenly it seemed to stop, and it's been quiet for months. But
not really. The protests actually never stopped. They did shrink in size. So a word about the protests, because this is also interesting, because how many times did you hear about the economic situation of Gaza? Well, I'm sure many of you heard, and it is very bad. There's no question about it, and nobody wants to see a humanitarian situation in Gaza. But, because there's always a but in our area, a campaign that started in Pesach last year, Passover last year in March, and is still going on today, is costing dozens of millions of dollars. And instead of investing that money, this is exactly the story of Gaza. instead of investing that money in their own people, they invested in protests and in metal. Why metal? Because that's what produces the rockets. And I'm telling you, every week, it's an organized system in which, after the prayers in the mosque, there are buses who come and pick up the people and take them to the fence. And some of the people are getting paid for this activity. So wouldn't it be more rational if this money would be spent on the people? Now, of course it would from a Western perspective, but we are fighting here ideology. And with this ideology, you can have the best jets, the best submarines, the most moral fighters, but it's ideology. And according to the ideology of Hamas, Israel does not have the right to exist. They say it openly, publicly, it's in their charter, and this is what we have to deal with.
So you mentioned before about northern Syria. Talk to us about the Kurds. What relationship did Israel have with the Kurds? What relationship does Israel have with the Kurds?
The Kurds is a tragic and sad story, I think. The Kurds are operating in 4 countries, trying to fight for their own freedom. Israel has supported the Kurds for a long time. And it basically does so on 2 fields. The first one is the humanitarian one. There are a few Israeli NGOs who are active on the ground through third partners, I would say, trying to support their Kurds with education, with psychological support, and with also some needs, concrete needs, whether it's blankets for the winter or medicine, or according to that period of time, exactly what the locals need. The other aspect, of course, is the security aspect. And when the U.S. took that decision, the official statement that came out from Israel did not actually criticize the U.S., but said the following: Israel has supported the Kurds and will continue to do so. And in a way, there are some similarities between Israel and the Kurds, minority, trying to build their own country. And I think Israel will continue to support them.
And there are Kurdish Jews as well.
That too we have.
Do they maintain relations with the Kurdish population?
I don't think so. But from time to time, you see Israeli journalists who fly to Iraq or other countries where the Kurds are in order to interview them and meet with them. And of course, they do it openly. They really love Israel. The Kurds really have a deep empathy for Israel.
So staying with northern Syria, you see Russia, obviously Russia's influence in the Middle East rose with their role in the war in Syria. We now see it playing an even more important role now that the U.S. has pulled out its troops. What is Israel's relationship with Russia?
Look, first of all, the Russians' interest in the Middle East didn't start with Assad's collapsing. It started in the 50s. So this is a long romance, I would say. Now, I think one of the important things that Netanyahu actually did, he kept an open channel of communication between Israel and the Russians. And when you think of it, we have no choice but to do it. The airspace is tiny. It's a tiny airspace. Russian aircrafts are flying. Israeli aircrafts are flying. You need a minimum of coordination. Sometimes Israel may wish to act on the ground, but it will not want Russia to interfere. So this relationship is critical. The open channel is critical. And it's for this reason exactly that Netanyahu has visited Russia and met with its leader, Putin, I think something like 10 times in the last couple of years. So I think that's quite a good strategy from an Israeli perspective.
What about Turkey? That's the other player in this part of the world, and obviously their influence in the region, once again, has also changed with the U.S. pulling out. What's Israel's relationship with Turkey at this point? We saw Prime Minister Netanyahu, after many years, apologize for the Mavi Marmara incident. Perhaps that was meant to warm relations. It doesn't seem like it has. Perhaps it was a momentary effect, but talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that same apology that you mentioned also included the Turkish part. And the Turkish part was that they will not host Hamas leaders in Turkey. And unfortunately, today, we are seeing a different Turkey. We're seeing a Turkey led by Erdogan, who is using many times anti-Semite rhetoric. We are seeing Turkey as a host country for Hamas leaders. And we are seeing a country, Turkey, which is not really abiding to NATO, I would say, conventional rules. So all of this puts Israel and Turkey in a situation in which the relations are not warm relations. There are some trade relations and some Israeli tourism, but not more than that. I remember the days where Israel and Turkey and the US held joint exercises, different Navy exercises. Everything stopped on May 2010 with the Marmara. I was there, by the way, physically. I was the one explaining to the world about the situation. Mavi Marmara was only one out of 6 vessels. And I saw the Mavi Marmara. They didn't have any humanitarian aid on it. Nothing. There were 400 people on the ship. 30 of them were IHH, terrorist group, and there wasn't any humanitarian aid on the ship. It was a provocation. The helicopters that the IDF actually pre-planned to fly footage from the sea to the land, to the studios in the land, and to show the footage to the world, actually was used to evacuate people who were injured on this incident. So unfortunately, I don't see the relations resuming to what they have been prior to May 2010.
But there are relations. You say trade relations.
Primarily trade and tourism.
Okay. With the worsening of relations with Turkey, it seems to have opened the door for better relations with Cyprus. I believe you know something about Israel's relationship with Cyprus. Talk to us about that relationship. And I think it's not simply just a relationship of friends. It's become extremely strategic for Israel.
So I mentioned, the mutual military exercises between Israel and Turkey prior to 2010. Obviously, an army needs to exercise, and you need to find an alternative in the area. It's not only for the exercise itself, it's also preparing for the worst. And Israel did find 2 new partners in the region, Greece and Cyprus. And the relations with each of these countries have strengthened in the past 8 years, bringing into a situation in which, for instance, last year, there was a Hezbollah operative that was arrested in Cyprus after Israeli intelligence shared the information with Cyprus. Imagine the amount of lives that have been saved. This is someone who tried to put up a bomb. I think the cooperation is on many levels, not only security. As you know, Israel recently discovered some gas, which was a very positive situation and major influence on economy. And now we're looking at bigger projects. One of them is called the East Med, for example. We're looking at Egypt as a partner, as Cyprus as a partner, as Greece as a partner, and this will benefit actually the entire area. And of course, from a tourism perspective, amazing numbers. 450,000 Israelis visit Greece every year. And approximately 300,000 Israelis visit Cyprus. Cyprus is just 42 minutes away from Israel, and Greece is approximately 2 hours. So I think there's great relations. I think we will see them strengthening. And in a way, something positive came from Turkey.
Not to mention everybody getting married in Cyprus.
Not everybody, but some are getting married.
All right, let's move to the conflict with the Palestinians. AJC is committed to a 2-state solution, believing that that's the only viable option to keep Israel both Jewish and democratic. But at this point, tell us the view of most Israelis about the possibility of a 2-state solution.
Look, there are a few things here we need to talk about. First of all, let's talk about the readiness of the Palestinians to have their own state. Let's say tomorrow morning, miraculously, They have the right to build a state. Can they do it? This is the question. Now, these are 2.4 million people that until 2009, 2008, 2009, did not have one police station, did not have one prison. This is only 10 years ago. So if there will be a situation one day of a Palestinian state, it will have to be in a gradual way. It will have to be done in a gradual way, because the last thing we need now in the Middle East is another failed state. We don't need another chaos. Now, here's the situation. As you know, Israel and the Palestinians have engaged in talks for 25 years. Different offers, different proposals. They were all declined, including the famous one of 97% return of the territory. And when I'm looking at the two leaders, Abu Mazen, 84 years old, not in its best health, I'm not sure that he wants to leave behind him a legacy of concessions, that he would be the Palestinian president that gave up for the Israelis. I'm not sure that would happen. He has other issues. He's not popular in the Palestinian street. He's perceived as corrupt. He's not liked. He's not welcomed. So I don't see that from his side. From the Israeli side, again, we're talking about Netanyahu, who is very much busy with political survival. And I don't see him making any concessions because he needs the votes. So how can he give up the votes of the people? It's not a good time to do a deal. So I don't think, unfortunately, that we'll be seeing any progress anytime soon on that specific issue. The recent polls in Israel show that 60% of Israelis are still supporting the two-state solution. And this is a positive thing, but at the end of the day, we need two brave leaders who will be ready to move forward with concessions.
So you don't only meet with Israelis, you meet with diplomats. That's a big part of your work. Is the two-state solution a conversation that you have these days with diplomats, or is this something that just doesn't come up anymore?
This is unbelievable. I mean, you know, there are many ambassadors, dozens of ambassadors in Israel. And I have great relationship with many of them. And usually in the introductory meetings, I ask them, you know, what are your main goals sitting as ambassador of so-and-so country in Israel? What is your main primary goal? None of them raise the issue of the Palestinians. None of them. But you know what the main goal is? To bring investors to Israel, or to bring Israeli investors to their country, or to learn from the Israeli model of innovation. And therefore, many of them have economic attaches. Many of them take care and organize business delegations to Israel. And somehow, this is the main issue today. This is the current issues. I think that in some ways, the issue of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict has been left to the stage of the UN and not really the day-to-day kind of diplomatic relations that Israel has.
So for many years, you had a role which involved social media. You really were a pioneer in terms of social media with the IDF, making it a bit of a powerhouse that it is today in terms of promoting and advocating using social media. Talk to us a little bit about social media. For those who know me, I push social media a lot. I think it's the most powerful tool that individuals have to be advocates. We're an advocacy organization. Talk to us from your perspective as a real professional about the importance of social media.
Look, today, if you want to influence an audience, you cannot do it without using social media. And it's a wonderful platform to reach a specific audience. For instance, if you want to reach women ages 20 to 30 who are living in a specific city in Norway, you can reach them through social media. And you can always check your impact on what you've done with this specific group of women. So I think there's no choice. In order to send our message out there, we have to be active on social media. I'm happy that AJC is doing that in a great success. I'm doing it too, by the way, in my own Twitter account. But one of the challenges in social media is that, everybody is a reporter today. Everybody has the phone, everybody's a reporter. And this actually brings a lot of misinformation. And I'm sure that some of you maybe saw this misinformation, but you didn't even know that it was misinformation. And I would like to give you an example. A BBC correspondent serving in Jerusalem a few years ago tweeted a picture. And in the picture, you've seen a stretcher in a hospital, and an 80-year-old girl was lying on the stretcher, apparently dead, and the baby sitting on the floor next to the stretcher. Without a question, a heart-breaking picture, regardless of where it has been taken. And then this reporter added the caption, and the caption was, "Pain in Gaza." And this was a BBC reporter. Do you know how many times you tell your neighbors, well, we heard something on the TV, I read it on the newspaper, then it must be true, right? We saw, we read, we heard. The only problem with the picture was that it was taken in Syria. So I pick up the phone. Luckily, we found out after 10 minutes that it was a fake picture. Pick up the phone, call the bureau chief of the BBC in the Jerusalem office, and ask him immediately to post a complaint, to post some kind of a post which explains that this was a fake picture, and he apologizes for that, which he did. But in those 10 minutes, precious minutes, this picture has been retweeted hundreds of times. So the social media is a huge asset, but also can be dangerous in that sense because it's filled of information. And I recommend everyone, when you receive something from social media, don't further share it unless you know the source behind it, because you may be falling into a trap without even knowing it.
So everybody needs to be on social media. You heard it from the source. Don't just rail against the television. Don't just talk to the converted. Put your message out there. It's the best way for people to be advocates, for individuals to be advocates. Facebook, Twitter, whatever you want to choose.
And it doesn't take much. A computer, a laptop.
Go to the AJC page, like what we have, comment on what we have, share what we have. There's no more effective way for you to be advocates. Deborah Lipstadt, she wrote a book called Anti-Semitism Here and Now. Difficult book to read, although very informative. I interviewed her on the radio about it. She chooses to end her book by saying that we as Jews focus too much on the oi and not enough on the joy. Israelis know how to focus on the joy. And why do I say that? Because every year there's a survey put out by the UN, and every year that survey comes out and it says that Israelis are some of the happiest people in the world.
Look.
This year, Israelis are number 13. So with all of the terrible things that we just talked about tonight and all of the challenges that Israel faces, Israelis are some of the happiest people in the world. Why?
It's very simple. I'll give you all a soundbite. The oi is a part of the joy.
Wait, look at the camera and
It's
say
part
that.
of it. It's part of it. I think Israelis are hopelessly optimistic people. And it's something in the nature. I think we have in our DNA the will to create, to innovate, to find solution. I mean, when I checked my luggage, for example, coming here, the woman at the counter said something about, if I'm not a member, I can't check 2 pieces of luggage. So of course, I'm an Israeli, I'm not going to take that for an answer, right? So we worked our way, and it worked fine. Everything was solved, okay? It took 5 more minutes. So I think we have this issue in our DNA. We are looking for the solution. We're looking to move forward. We're always aspiring higher and higher. And at the end of the day, we have good lives in Israel. Our quality of life is very good. And the fact that we send our kids to the army and we do so ourselves, it's part of this lifestyle that we chose. During the operation in Gaza that we had 5 years ago, which was quite quite lengthy. It was 50 days of rockets that hit Tel Aviv and hit Jerusalem. You know, the airport, the international airport, Ben Gurion Airport, was opened the entire time, except 36 hours. Did you see a huge rush of Israelis escaping the country? No. And I think it tells a lot about our DNA as people.
One last question for Avital. So in a few weeks, many of us will be sitting down to our Thanksgiving dinners. I know that you do a very special program in relation to Thanksgiving with lone soldiers. Maybe as a final question, tell us about that program.
First of all, I had a lot of lone soldiers as a commander from all over the world. By the way, exotic places. For example, I had a lone soldier from Hawaii and Peru and really exotic places. And I'm very much aware and sensitive to the fact that at the end of the day, when they return home, they have no one to do their cooking for them and no one to do the laundry and no one to help them with just taxes with the municipality. They're alone. It's really lone soldiers. So I think that a tradition that was started 15 years ago in AJC Jerusalem, we're marking the 15th year this year, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to show a little bit of appreciation to those lone soldiers who sacrificed, in a way, a part of their life. They immigrated to Israel, they left their family and friends behind, and decided to start a life in an, I would say, a challenging framework in a strange country, and be determined at it. So every year we are having, exactly on Thanksgiving in Jerusalem, a very special Thanksgiving dinner, which we invite all Canadian and American soldiers, lone soldiers, women and men from all parts of the Army and the Border Police. And we try to give them some inspirational speaker. One of the last speakers was someone who actually has been hijacked with the Sabena plane, the Air France plane to Entebbe. And he actually was 13 years old. It was bar mitzvah trip. He was kidnapped, and he gave a whole story how this actually strengthened him as an individual, and now he's a very successful business guy. So we're trying to give them, of course, the whole feast with the turkey. Yes, we have turkeys in Israel, with the stuffing, with the sauce, the cranberry sauce, the whole thing, plus a little bit of inspiration, and by this actually show them our appreciation. We have around 50 soldiers who come, and it's a wonderful event. If you happen to be in Jerusalem, in that area, consider yourselves invited to the feast.
Thank you very much. A good note to go to questions. Who's first?
Just today, the leader of Hamas in Gaza said that he will start 6 months of continuous, uninterrupted missile attacks on Israel if Israel does not remove the blockade. My question is, how come Israel has not dealt with Hamas in a more rigorous way than it has until now? Benny Gantz said it's time for getting rid of the Hamas leaders. Why hasn't that happened?
Well, you're talking about a situation called targeted killings, in which there is an airplane in the air following a terrorist driving on a motorcycle or in a vehicle, or finding him or her in their home and then killing that terrorist. For a while, Israel did have this kind of policy, but I think it stopped due to different kinds of international pressure. But the question is, what would be the achievement of something like that? How would this benefit the situation between Israel and Gaza? Would this maybe be more of harm to the people of Gaza? Would this open some sort of a front with Israel? In other words, you always have to do the calculation. If you are taking down a Hamas leader, that means maybe 400 rockets on 3 million Israelis. Is that worth the price? I'm not sure. So Israeli leaders are reluctant in going in such an all-out kind of way. Basically, what you heard from Hamas leader today is a message which was actually spoken in return to the Israeli message, which said, we will not tolerate such a situation. So each of the sides has this kind of deterring messages to the other side. Now, look, obviously we're looking at ideology. And with ideology, again, the impact is very limited, very unfortunately, but this is the situation. So every couple of years, Israel finds itself in a situation in which it initiates some sort of a limited military operation with a concrete goal. The concrete goal is not to hit one person or a terrorist or 3 terrorists or 200 terrorists. The concrete goal has to do with cleaning out the launchers, for example, so they won't have launchers to launch rockets, or finding the underground tunnels which may be infiltrating into Israel and then exploding them. So there's always this major goal for these kind of operations. In my opinion, we're very close to such another operation. You know, in the last year and a half, hundreds of rockets have been fired from Gaza into Israel. The worst part is that many of them have been fired within 72 hours or 48 hours. Imagine 300 rockets fired in 72 hours. You can do the math. This is an abnormal situation. But it's very easy to drop a bomb and wipe Gaza. We will not do it. It's not part of our values as people. It will never happen.
I believe I read recently that the Jordanian ambassador to Israel was recalled. If I got that right, can you explain a little bit about how significant that is?
It's not extremely significant. I would say that 2 Jordanian civilians have been arrested in August. They tried to visit Israel. According to the story they gave at the border crossing, is they came for a wedding. And as you know, 70% of the Jordanian population are Palestinians. And according to the Israeli intelligence, it turned out that the wedding was not really a wedding. It was a cover story, probably for some kind of espionage. And therefore, they were held in jail for the last couple of weeks. And this is what Jordan recalling the ambassador is a protest in a way. I don't know exactly, what is the outcome of the investigation of these 2 people. If nothing comes out of it, of course, they'll go back. But if there's something there, maybe there will be some sort of a trial. The question is, how do we tell the world in a better way about the interfaith relations, the great cooperation that goes on in Israel between Christians, Muslims, and Jews? So 3 years ago, we had huge fires in Haifa. 70,000 people were evacuated from their homes. And the US sent the super tanker, and there were other countries who helped. By the way, Egypt was one of them. And a few days after the fire, I read in the newspaper that a local synagogue in Haifa, a conservative one, was burnt, and then some Muslim and Christian leaders in the city actually helped renovate. So I decided to go to the synagogue, which I didn't know in the past. I went with a rabbi of the synagogue, just drove to Haifa, had an appointment with him, and wanted to hear the story. And the story was just a classic example of this kind of cooperation that goes on 10,000 times a day. And the story was that the synagogue was burnt. They had to perform different ceremonies, from Brit Milah to others. The furniture was gone. Everything was black, from the smoke. And his Christian friend, who is actually a pastor, a Maronite pastor, helped raise money for drinks and different kinds of food for the party of the bris. And his Muslim friend, who is a Muslim sheikh, actually went to a business guy who lives in Haifa and has a carpentry, and they prepared all the furniture. So what I did was I brought all three leaders to stand on the stage in the AJC Global Forum 3 years ago in front of 3,000 people in Washington, D.C., and they told the story. Imagine it, the priest standing with his traditional clothing, the sheikh standing with the traditional clothing, and the rabbi, he has a beard by this specific case. And it was really a simple, humanitarian, classic story of cooperation that takes place really so many times a day. And I wanted to share this with the world. And this is something that you can see many times in other areas in the country. It's enough that you go to Jaffa, or Akko, or Ramla, or Lod, or other mixed cities, and you will see the interaction between the people. By the way, Fauda, I'm sure you heard about Fauda. Fauda is filmed in an Arab village, which is very close to where I live. And so these interactions are ongoing. 20.7% of the population in Israel are Muslim. The only place in the Middle East where the Christians thrive is in Israel. 130,000 of them, not in Lebanon, where they escaped from the 70s, millions of them until today. And of course, not in Syria. And of course, not in the West Bank too, by the way. Their situation in the West Bank is also not amazing. So at the end of the day, you are right. These stories should be out whenever we can. We try to share them with the world. But the issue is this. It's not really stories. It's an everyday life situation.
So the question is, why should this person not be frightened to bring his grandchildren to Israel in the next few weeks if there might be another operation, as you point out?
I'm not in a position to tell you how to feel and how to analyze, your risks. But I can tell you that from my perspective, we behave normal as possible. We go about our everyday lives. We don't calculate the situation. We don't think to ourselves, oh, wait a minute, maybe in 5 minutes something will happen, so I'll rush quickly to the supermarket because God forbid something will happen. That's not the way we think. And when we had that stabbing, the 2 years of horrible stabbings, many of the incidents happened near our office in Jerusalem. So I stayed off the streets for 2 years. I went looking over my shoulder all the time to see whether someone is coming with a knife. No, you increase your awareness a little bit, but of course it's a minimal thing. Look, again, I don't see the leaders of Israel going directly and engaging in all-out kind of war or an operation which is very wide scale. The question is what our enemies in the area will do. If an Iranian rocket will be fired and hit a civilian building and will kill Israelis, then we can find ourselves in a totally different scenario. I feel safe in Israel. My kids can return at midnight from their friends safely. We don't have in Israel pictures of kids on milk cartons. We don't have that. And we don't have supermarkets where they sell guns. So for me, being here, it's sometimes less secure than being in Israel.
So someone wants to know about the fact that you have a situation now in the Middle East where the countries surrounding Israel that for years posed a great threat are now very preoccupied with their own insurgencies or possible insurgencies or just chaos in their region and perhaps not as interested in Israel as they were in the past.
Look, the only existential threat we have will be in a situation in which Iran becomes nuclear. That's it. We'd never had existential threat from Saudi Arabia or from Iraq or from other countries in the area. That is not the issue, and that does not change the fact now. But there is one change that didn't happen 10 years ago and is happening today, and that is the fact that Israel has all these informal relations with many Arab countries, who, by the way, have enough from the Palestinians already. And they're furious with them. They're not moving forward. So we are in a different atmosphere, I would say, in the region. And if you will, you can divide the countries into more moderate countries, into more extremist-natured countries. And Israel, of course, is on the moderate side, but it has partners today. You know, a few months ago, I was watching a news program at the most popular TV channel in Israel. And suddenly the anchor says, okay, let's pass now to Riyadh and speak with a journalist there. Riyadh. And this is something that was not acceptable until a year or 2, 3 years ago. And the journalist is standing there with his own name, not covered, not anything, and giving a report from Riyadh. So I understand we are looking for a quicker change than the culture really dictates, a different tone, different pace. But there are some positive trends. Unfortunately, Iran, with a capability to develop a nuclear bomb, will be the existential threat, regardless of that positivity.
So Seth is asking, with regard to the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu may be indicted, if he's indicted, perhaps Likud is not going to allow him to continue to represent them as the #1 person on their ticket. And if that's the case, not only would he not be prime minister, but he would also be out of the Knesset based upon the rules as he understands it.
So look, I don't see a situation in which people from the Likud will run against Netanyahu. That will not happen unless Netanyahu is out of the picture, which a few candidates already mentioned that they are aiming towards that seat. Sorry, you mentioned is one of them, but there are a few others as well. But, you know, we are talking about some kind of thesis. If this will happen, then this will happen. If that will happen, another thing will happen. You know, my short experience with Israeli politics says that you can't really anticipate and predict anything in Israeli politics. So I think we should wait and see how things turn out. But I hear sometimes voices that maybe there will be like an internal revolution from within the party they will overthrow. I don't really think that's not an Israeli nature thing to do. So I don't see that happening. Maybe in Iraq that could happen, but in Israel, I don't think we're there quite yet. I don't think we'll reach that point.
2 more questions. Anne wants to know about the perspective of, or the fact that Democrats perhaps may not, in the future, give the same sort of support to Israel that they have in the past. And if the Democrats win the next election, we may be facing a situation of decreased support.
Look, there are 2 things that must remain. Number 1, the U.S. should continue and stay Israel's strongest ally, regardless of who sits in the administration. But number 2 is that Israel should not be a partisan issue. And we need to make sure that this is happening. We in AJC are working very hard on this. I can tell you that in all my dialogue with the Israeli Foreign Ministry, they're on the same page. I understand politicians have their own needs and their own priorities, but we must not give up on this issue. Israel should not be identified with one party or another party. It's an ally of the US, maybe the strongest and closest, most important ally in the region, in the Middle East. And by the way, those scenarios that I described to you before in the borders, this is not only a Middle Eastern issue. This is not Israel's problem, because if those 3,000 prisoners, Daesh prisoners, who are guarded by the Kurds, will find their way all over the world to establish terror cells, then that's a global issue, just like Hezbollah has been doing for decades. So there's a tendency to think that this is only an Israeli problem. It should be contained in the Middle East. No, we are in a global situation today. Nothing is contained in a specific region. So Israel should remain a bipartisan issue, regardless of the administrations.
So the question is in terms of ultra-Orthodox having control over aspects of the state and religion in the state. Where do you see that going?
So look, at the end of the day, again, as an Israeli, the impact that I have on my daily life with the ultra-Orthodox is very minimal. And the country is secular, and a lot of traditions are brought into the secular homes. but they're not halachic and they're not religious, and I don't see any situation of that changing at all. Now, if the Ultra-Orthodox will continue to be a part of the coalition, they will receive their fundings and so on, so be it. But from our perspective, from the vast majority of the population perspective, this should not affect our daily lives. By the way, they have their own education systems. Now, if you mentioned the demographics, the birth rate, this is something interesting to talk about the demographics in Israel, because I remember that in the 70s and the 80s, there were researchers that actually said that the birth rate among the Arab population in Israel would be so high that the Israelis, after 20, 30 years, will be the minority. The Jews will be the minorities. Now, in 2017, just 2 years ago, this was the first year in which the birth rate among the Jewish population and the Arab population was the same, 3.1 children per family, because there are trends you cannot conceal. There are modern trends. The population is becoming more educated, and as they become more educated and more modern, then they have less kids. By the way, the Ultra-Orthodox society is in a similar direction. Today, the Ultra-Orthodox society works. 75% of the women work. 55% of the men work. They have their own colleges, special colleges designed especially for them, where they can feel comfortable, and they have alternate days for men and women. And they work in serious places, in high-tech, for example. I'm not talking only about low-tech. So the trend is very much there, and I don't see a situation that Israel suddenly becomes or turns into a halachic state. I don't see that happening.
Many thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Avital Leibovich,
Thank you.
AJC Jerusalem Director, for being with us this evening.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. And we're especially pleased to remind you that thanks to a generous matching gift from the Cayley family, every new or increased dollar you donate to JBS will be worth double to JBS. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.